Hey everyone, Diggs here for Lockpickers United, and today I'm going to be breaking down the lock of the week, which is the AVA Duel. This thing is a seriously nasty lock. It's one of my favorite keys, as I'm going to show you here, and it's one of the hardest locks I've ever picked. So if you could see, there's two tracks on each side of this key, and it is reversible, which is why it just winds up looking so cool. For each of the key cuts, there is a small rounded area or a flat. So it can really throw you off if you're just looking at the key. You have to know the spacing. The key cuts won't tell you the whole story. So here I'm showing you the cylinder. There's some damage right there from my many picking attempts and probably way too much tension. But I struggled with this thing real hard, so it's pretty beaten up. And you'll see signs of that all throughout the lock. But it still operates smooth as anything, so. This is a modular cylinder with a very welled out piece of hardware holding it together. And I put it all back on there just so you could see. This is the bit that I got from the guy that sold it to me. He knew that it was all jacked up, and he told me about it and sent me the bit for free, so whatever. That's how you take off this portion of the assembly. And once you got that off, it looks most like any other cylinder. I put this soft metal C-clip on the back just for the purposes of this video. It doesn't normally have a C-clip like that. It normally has a much more annoying one. I mean, it's really strong metal. So just for the purposes of this video, I slapped that on there. And what you'll see is, as I try to take this thing apart, I put the key in, I turn it just like you would any other cylinder, and lo and behold, it doesn't want to move anywhere. And you'll see how much I struggle with this thing, which is quite a bit. So once you finally do get it to move just a little bit, you'll see the drill protection loves to jump out there. See it? Yeah. I'll show you where that goes exactly nearer to the end of this video. But that's just in there to keep you from being able to drill through the stacks of sliders. And after I mess around with this for a little while and try to get it at the right angle, which there isn't one in this case, I go and get my jewelry mallet, one little tap, and she's free. So as I slide this out, you'll note that I'm holding in two sidebars, one with my thumb and one with my pointer finger. And I'm going to give you a real good view of the different stages of this lock body. You can see it's all separated by these very sharp, very well machined pieces of metal. And you can see the cutouts on either side for the sidebars. And that's the reason that this lock doesn't want to slide out. You see these two sliders up here, right there and there, and this little one on the bottom in the third position left side stick out past the plug. And because they do, they catch on those sharp metal lips. And so when you give it just a little tap, it'll slide it past that. And it can withstand that, but there's another way to get it out that I'll talk about a little later. I've just never tried it myself. So here I'm going to let the sidebars go. These are both spring-loaded, and they have two very small springs. So I highly recommend you have a plan for where those are going, just in case the little springs pop out and you lose one. And you'll get to see them right here. So this is, I think, the left sidebar. So you see the fingers on this thing are all down at the bottom edge as this sits in the plug. And the opposite side is a mirror of that. So with the key inserted, you can see all the true gates as you look into the sidebar cutouts, and they're all at the bottom. So you can see I'm going to point them out with my pick here, and then I'll catch it with better light in just a second. But what you're trying to do is get all those true gates lined up with the very bottom on either side. It's the bottom in both cases, so that the sidebar fingers can fit within them and insert into the plug body and out of the lock body, and that allows the plug to rotate. So if you look real close, you can see there's a slider, and then underneath that nub there's a little spring, and it will just shoot that slider right out of there if you don't cover it as you pull the key out. You can see once I take my thumb off, they all raise a little bit, the ones in the back a lot a bit, and they're all springy now to the touch. So now I'm just going to take a little modified short hook and poke them up out of each of their respective chambers and lay them out. And you see I hesitate here. I'm like, wait a second, there's 12 of these things. I'm going to organize them without losing it. So I decide left and right hand side of the plug, and so I do the whole right side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, from the center of the mat, and then I do the same thing with the left hand side. So it looks like I'm going backwards, but it's how I organized it in my head as I was going along. Now that I got all the sliders out, I'm going to give you a good look at all these springs. They're very small, they're very narrow, but they're also really tall. And so you'll see when I go to tap them out here, I get a couple pretty easy, but they just don't really want to slide out. They're so small, and those coils, they will trap little tiny hairs if you got them and you have them laid out on your mat. Any little thing that's there, fabric, fibers, will get into those things. It can be pretty annoying actually to try and pull that back out, because if you pull on a spring and that hair lets go, then the spring will fly. So I've discovered that using a lighter, you can burn those fibers off of there and get them out of the spring without having to pull on it. So here you can see I'm using my hook to just go into each slider chamber and just kind of touch and push up each spring enough that I can grab them with my fingers. And other than being real tall and small, there's not really anything special about those springs. You can see there now all the holes that they sit in. And I'm going to show you, that's where the drill protection plate goes down in there. And there's springs down in there too. So that's why it launches out. I don't bother to take the springs out of there just because they are in there pretty good. And you can see there's the shape. There's a little cutout on the face of the lock that matches with that drill protection plate. So now I'm going to show you what one of these sliders looks like. There's 12 of them in this lock, and they're pretty interesting. So this nub that you see on this side, the larger of the two nubs, that's what actually interacts with the key. Gets pushed by the key and moves the slider up and down. That smaller nub is there for interaction with the spring. It actually sits on top of the spring, and as the slider moves downward, it compresses the spring. And then you see we've got two false gates on either side of a true gate. The false gates are shallower, and they are what the lock wants you to get caught in. They do a pretty good job of feeling like a set slider. As you move it and you get a click, a lot of times you'll think that it's set, but it's really not. You have to get it into that true gate, and the only way to tell the difference is to very lightly touch that slider, move it around a little bit, and by practice and judgment, you will be able to tell if it's got the amount of movement that it would have in the true gate, or if it still feels a little bound. So generally, it will feel loose, but will not move too far up or down in a true gate. And when it's in a false gate, it feels bound, although it will still move a little bit because it's moving against a flat face. So that's what you'll hear referred to very commonly as the jiggle test, and we'll touch on that more in another video. So here you can see this is how the sidebar sits in the lock body itself, and once you have all those sliders aligned, the teeth on the sidebar can insert into the sliders and into the plug, which lets it insert out of the lock body, and the whole thing can turn. And here I'm going to show you just the fact that if you look at the left-hand side of the lock and the right-hand side, these sliders are not perfectly lateral. They're actually diagonal. I mean, it's the first, the second, all of these various chambers, they're offset by a little bit. And that's how that nub would ride on the key. So you can see the difference between a true gate and a false gate on this slider is fairly significant. I would say it's about twice as deep for a true gate. And just one last thing, we talked about how this plug can get stuck in the lock body because of the sliders. So Captain Hook number 1 suggested to me that you can actually, if you know that you've got some in there, or if you feel like there's some in there holding you up, you can actually just kind of move them with a pick and get them out of your way. And that's the teardown of the AVA Duel. Hopefully you come back for Slaying Saturday and watch Geo take down this monster of a lock. Happy picking!